No.
Hey, welcome back to the UAC podcast. This is Joseph Johnson with you as always. Rejoined again by our authors, Jed Smith and Dr. Peter Smolianov, authors of Fringe Methodologies in High Performance and Health. And we're taking a step-by-step, chapter-by-chapter, section-by-section, kind of looking at the book and getting this overview of what's the state of the art in the field in different areas right now. So one of the big areas, and this is something that's kind of, I would almost dare say is fringish just in its title or, in its function in the United States, but is really, was always a part of the very foundation of the high performance model in the Soviet Union, in the GDR, and some other places. It was fundamental, and that's the area of the sports psychology. So most people would say when they look at sports psychology, I think one thing that a lot of people first reaction would be, okay, this is for somebody who has a problem, right? Maybe they have an anxiety performance problem. Maybe they have, a lot of them will have different problems. One that I heard the other day that I think is very common called imposter syndrome, where they're elite but they feel like they're an imposter, like they're not really as good as they are maybe, or as good as they perform, like they're pretending. Those are things that come to mind automatically. Now, in my research and we've published one book in the field, the performance side can't be overlooked. I mean, just to enhance performance in general, this is with somebody who doesn't have necessarily any hangups or, anything that's really kind of holding them back. This is for just a normal person who wants to see what can they do. So you guys, you dedicate a whole chapter to this. You look at a bunch of different ideas and topics within the framework or under that umbrella of sports psychology. Right now, what's the state of the art in sports psychology? What are the tools and methods that are being used to enhance performance throughout the world?
Joseph, one thing I will say is you're spot on negative connotations with the word psychology, sports psychology. A lot of athletes they get nervous, like well, this is. I don't have a problem, and they don't have a problem. And it's almost like a negative term to an athlete, like, there's nothing wrong with my mind. And it's almost better to mental performance enhancement is where it should be. And that's more the focus. Not that there's some type of problem with the individual, although, because athletics is highly stressful and there's a lot of demands placed on athletes, and athletes that train very, very, very hard, and their time is being taken away from them, and maybe they can't budget their time as well. They do have a lot of anxiety, and athletes do struggle with depression. So there can be a negative mental effect that can happen with a lot of athletes. And in fact, we've had plenty of athletes that have went through depressions because of the high stress that they're in. But Dr. Smolianov and I are not focused on those issues as much as let's look at what we can help the athlete's performance. But with all that, better organization, like Peter was alluding to before, on the diaries that they're keeping and journaling and so forth, can alleviate that. And just being better organized can help reduce the stress on the mental side. But we're going to focus mostly, Joseph, on just tactics that can be done to help the athlete focus or getting the zone in a flow state. The ideal performance state of mind is a state of no mind. Back the Japanese used to call it the samurai, a state of mushin, a state of no mind, meaning they're not thinking about anything. They've trained so hard, they've put all their preparations in, so when they're in the competition, they're in a state of flow. They're not thinking, they're reacting. and putting before being in that state of flow, you need to put the time in, the training. The central nervous system needs to be trained over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So those neural pathways are just reactive. Okay, so it's become second nature. And if the athlete is prepared, the more prepared the athlete, the better the chances they are in that state of motion where they're not worried about making mistakes here and there. But some of these tactics that we're going to talk about can help alleviate the anxiety. Some athletes, when they struggle with the fact they put in all the time, they prepared so well, and you've probably seen them, Peter, numerous times, that in practice, phenomenal. I know as a world-class athlete, Peter, you've seen some of these athletes that you know personally that were practice athletes, like the best. You couldn't beat them. But then the crazy thing is they get into where the stakes get very high and it actually counts. And then maybe some athletes Peter couldn't beat in practice, but then in competition, he can beat, or vice versa. And that's where we're talking about helping the athlete to be able to get into, do what they can do. So, Peter, you want to add here?
Well, it's what is, I think, fringe now that is becoming a mass is the ability to manipulate through the subliminal,
Mm-hmm.
not through the conscious, but through subconscious and through subliminal.
Absolutely.
And good teachers now use this at school. And this is the effect of high performance sport. Simple yoga, calming and focusing and breathing exercises have been used in preparation of performance athletes, and now teachers at school, some very good teachers, I'd say. Again, it's fringe at school, but they use it. They would sit the child down, and they would reduce the anxiety through yoga exercises, and this is an example of the best of what our book is trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Is to share some of the most simple things that high performance athletes are using, and they might be doing a lot more with that, and a lot more sophisticated methods of autogenic training, self-talk, self-control are used. But ideally, what we can do through this book is to highlight those methods that are simple enough for everybody to adopt in their everyday life, so that public health is positively affected, and public wellness and productivity of all is enhanced through our description of these methods. So that's at the mass level. This is the frigid state of the art. Is the use of some of this psychological training techniques for all. I think for top class athletes, it's going from autogenic training that became probably more or less standard across the world, going into more prolonged conditions that can be controlled, controlling your sleep, programming yourself, programming your athlete's mind, not in a short period of time for competition or for concentration during training, but for many hours of sleep. And I guess this might be still fringe even within most sport programs. So it's close to self hypnosis, and that is probably still and will remain fringe for many years, because it goes back to our discussion about skills of coaches. All that we're talking about now, it requires very high level of pedagogical, sports science, and sports psychology knowledge. So it's very challenging. It's a big question whether coaches are able to do it, or they have to give it to the actual psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fine line between, I think that is also moving in across the world. It finds its optimal, I'd say, balance and optimal practice. Where does the coach stop assisting athletes as a sports psychologist, and where does the sports psychologist specialist steps in? It depends very much on the qualifications, knowledge, experience, expertise of the coach. In the Soviet Union, every coach was expected to be a sports psychologist and teach every athlete at least autogenic training, self-talk, self-control, self-regulation. It is actually changing in Eastern Europe now as well, because sports psychologists as specialists are becoming more and more important or popular. Not sure what's, but these are the sketches of the high performance world practices. Am I missing something important, Jed?
What's that? Yeah. I wanted to add. I think you had some very good points. I wanted to add on to, like the yoga. One of the things that is fringe with the concept of yoga is the idea of using a routine that you know and you've done over and over. We talked about the principle of consistency previously, and then you incorporate visualization because you get the routine down, so that it becomes second nature, the routine. You don't have to think about the routine, so you're getting your recovery and your mobility, flexibility training in, but then you're working on visualization during this time. And so, like Peter was saying, a high-level coach can teach the athlete how to be able to do this with certain concepts to keep in mind when they're getting better at their visualization, to be more vivid in picturing and describing it and putting the details in place in their mind, controlling their emotions, seeing a mistake happen and it doesn't faze them. Their emotions don't go up. They can control and come back and deal with anxiety. Nothing's going to be perfect in competition. It never will. And when you're practicing in a relaxed state, a yoga routine, to be able to visualize these things accurately, and the more they can see vividly, controlling their emotions, it very much helps. The idea as well is this athlete should be getting exposure to see these things in real life, like maybe going to events and watching a high level where they want to be, bringing that information in their brain to their training. And so the more exposure they have, whether it's watching videos and seeing where they want to be, how they want to do it, picturing themselves in their yoga routine, which, we talked about yoga and how important that is. It's more important than just mobility and relaxation. It's visualization. And that's fringe in itself, where I don't know that a lot of Western athletes are being taught that you can use this exercise as a period to practice your mental training. And this is, I'm going to be honest with you, the first I learned of doing this in this way is from Peter talking about to me how they were taught as athletes over in Russia. This was the standard, and I think it's brilliant. I just don't think over here in the United States. That's why I believe this is fringe. It might not be fringe to Peter, but here in the United States, when we talk about these training units that we should apply for therapeutic benefit, like our spine strength training, like the yoga, incorporating the visualization and the sports psychology or mental performance training on top of that, special workouts, Joseph, that are not that intense. Okay, so this is just more therapeutic workouts that we all should be doing. It's a great use of time, and it's very efficient. And I just wanted to add that, Peter, because what you were saying is right on, and it fits very, very well.
So
and this is
go ahead,
used
Doctor.
this is used by elite. This method is used by high performers in other areas where, say, personal coaches would teach like an executive of high level to jog or swim or do other continuous exercise that doesn't require too much of a thinking, and they teach them to resolve the problems, being in this state of kind of a discomfort, stimulating discomfort, I would say, that then produces the new state of mind, where your mind opens up and you might be able to resolve very complex business issues and find solutions to very complex business problems. So this is used outside of sport, but I think it's still used by elite outside of sport. That business people, or those who are trying to multitask and do 5 things at the same time in business, are using these methods of connecting physical and psychological in order to cross assist, in order to assist the psychological condition and help the mind to work better and clearer. Do some develop some physical routines that allow you to stimulate your mind, how your mind works. So hopefully it filters down to mass participants and also to everyone. And then the yoga school is one example, but also I think the problematic and very difficult, challenging, but very promising area is connection of psychology and ethics, psychology and morality, psychology and different settings. So setting your mind on achieving certain goals using psychological methods, but also using some moral and ethical mechanisms, what I must do, what is right, what is good, and therefore forgetting about distracting factors, forgetting about kind of doubts, being able to train and compete without any doubts, distractions, disturbances, by using not just only psychological methods, but also, if you wish, some ideological and even propaganda methods to,
Yeah.
to, to, to program your mind the way you want it to work.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of leads us to, one of the methods that you mentioned earlier, Jed, autogenic training.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that this has been a fundamental tactic that was used by the Russians, Soviets during the Cold War, and then other countries as well. It would be considered more fringe here. We haven't seen it as you know what it is. You've heard of it, but its consistent practice is fringe here. I wouldn't say that you know very many athletes who have a consistent practice of autogenic training. Can you, Dr. Smolianov, can you give some kind of a background on that, and then what it would look like? How does that work for the athlete? Is he learning this like by regular visits with the sports psychology professional, or is this, and ultimately, is the sports psychology professional teaching him how to do this for himself eventually, and where he's not as dependent, in that regard? How did that work, and what was the history behind that?
You need education, you need background in this, but I think there are we have to be open-minded about it. If there is no formal education for coaches, they still can study, learn, and try. There is nothing to kind of unsafe or dangerous about it. Sitting down teenagers and asking them to visualize, close their eyes, and visualize their training when they rest is an idea, a good start for any coach. Yeah, whether you wrestle or shoot or whatever you do, you can always lay down on the floor, close your eyes, and train. Go through the routines that you are doing, that you're doing in your training session. Go through them in your mind with closed eyes. Gymnasts are doing it at very early age. Gymnasts who go through complex movements as part of their competition even at young age, right? So this can be done by any in any sport.
Now, Peter, on the autogenic training, the way you were taught, I mean, it's a way of relaxing the body before the visualization to maybe release anxiety and stress. So, was there a formal approach that was done that was taught to you of exactly how you should do it, or your best practice when you were an athlete that seemed to be common?
It was integrated. It was integrated from quite early age practices, integrated into the physical training.
Can you explain a little bit of how it was done?
Well, the example I gave you is one of the most early kind of practices, because what you just verbalized might be too complicated for a little kid.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Even to say, "Hey, relax." Well, I don't know how to do that. But to say, close your eyes and imagine that you're doing what you've just done, skiing or shooting or playing, is probably okay for any kind of age to start with. Going through the drills and mastering that drill, thinking about how to not make a mistake, thinking about every little detail of your movement, and preparing for this as you're gonna do it now physically, preparing for it mentally with your closed eyes as you're just thinking about it, imagining that you're doing it. So I think before then there was build up on this, and both in terms of depth of it and spectrum of different phrases that that you must use and you must search for that are mostly effective for you personally to affect you, whether you need to calm down or whether you really the other way around, whether you need to excite yourself and energize yourself.
Did a coach ever have you like lay down and think of, you know, different parts of your body becoming either heavier or warmer, going throughout your body to try to get you to relax before you started visualizing? Did they teach you this practice?
I think a bit later. I think a little bit later.
Too complicated for young kids, huh?
Well, I think for young kids, I remember it was more of a just imagining things that just happened to you.
Okay.
You just this is this very specific drill you learn. This is how you throw, or this is how you do this one specific drill.
Okay.
Imagine it, and then yes, later on you lay down. You think about every part of your body. Think about the energy flow, blood flow, warmth. Imagining to when you're relaxing. Yes, imagining how heavy this is, so that you try to direct the energy and blood flow there, and more and then more and more complex and compound processes that you are thinking about within your body.
So you were saying there was the progressive sequence, the progressive overload being applied to the sports psychology. You just did this certain movement, a certain move. Okay, you sit down, relax. I want you to think about what you just did. Imagine what you just did. That's basic. Later on, you start applying more of the autogenic training concepts and then visualizing to relax and control emotions, anxiety.
Yeah, I think in particular when you have fine motor movements, that was a particular attention. So, for example, you need to do some in shooting, all types of target sports. I think it's important to start early with this. You might shoot, throw, whatever, using the target. Then the team would sit down and they would imagine doing this and trying to remember what was not done correctly, how to do it. So slow, then faster, and then go and do it physically. So that would be this was. I remember we've been doing a lot of it in shooting, because shooting is particularly difficult psychologically, because you need to block yourself from distractions.
Mm-hmm.
You need to control very fine movement of your finger when you shoot. When you pull the trigger, it must be very controlled movement, and a lot of people shake at this point.
Yeah.
Because subconsciously you cannot control it. So that's why in such sports as shooting, and it is particularly critical to use autogenic training.
Excellent.
So
good.
I remember we've spent quite a lot of time refining our movements while sitting with closed eyes.
Wow.
And basically, and I think creativity of the coach is very important here, because filling the gaps of inactivity or rest with psychological exercises is you can be very creative doing this. Also, connecting physical and psychological is very important. For example, in shooting, you can shoot with a bullet, with full shot. You can shoot with without a bullet. Okay, and still shooting, but without a bullet.
The mechanics are the same.
But it's already different. It's already psychologically completely different experience without a shot, without a bullet shot.
Psychologically, yeah, there's no recoil, with if you're using like a snap cap or whatever, and you're just practicing your trigger pull, but then psychologically knowing there's real ammunition changes, even though the mechanics are exactly the same.
And this kind of exercise can be applicable to many sports. From shooting, what we take is, okay, you have a gun, and the shooter doesn't know how many bullets are there. So you shoot very well the first one with a bullet. Second one without too much of a shaking, and then the one without a bullet. There is no shot, but there's only a click. And at this point, very often a shooter would do this, like this, a mistake. So it's a psychological exercise. You're teaching yourself to be prepared, and then the next step is you're only pulling without even shooting. Then you're doing it with closed eyes. You're doing it and then you're doing it completely without moving your arms, without moving your fingers. So you're doing it in your mind. Then you're then coming back from psychological to physical slowly, using your hand, using something in your hand, then doing a shot without a bullet, then finally doing a full bullet shot. This is an example of this connection that is hard to see between psychological and physical, that every coach can try and connect.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's kind of, while you guys were talking, I was thinking autogenics really is like, it was kind of like the precursor to virtual reality now, where the environment's immersive and you're not using your imagination necessarily, but it's kind of duplicating that, and you're going through those actions, and maybe there's music, or maybe there's verbal cues in that. It's kind of like it's almost like the virtual reality for the Cold War, during the time before we had that technology.
And then Joseph, even moving into the lucid dreaming while you're sleeping, it's just taking the idea of what Peter's saying to another level.
Yeah. So with the lucid dreaming, this is one that'll probably I was familiar with lucid dreaming in terms of so in the counseling setting, and in people who maybe were suffering from maybe PTSD, or had some real psychological hurdles, maybe based upon some experiences or whatever the case might be. But lucid dreaming, I'd heard of that, where they were dealing with different things, real specific things. In the area of sports, this is going to be probably even more fringe. You're not going to see a lot of this in the United States, especially as it pertains to athletes. So how is it being used with athletes, and kind of what's the process for using it?
Well, the idea is to be able to take control of your dreams, and to be able to dream about what you want. it's something that's actually becoming a little bit, I mean, still fringe, but more and more prevalent with, you know, technology. There's what are called binaural beats, which are
Yeah.
on YouTube, trying to help people to get into lucid dreaming states where they're, you know, and it's free. It's free for the masses. You can use these beats that are set up to affect you subconsciously when you sleep, that allow you to have more access and control of what it is that whatever you're trying to dream or control. Some people, I mean, I think a lot of people have had lucid dreams without any help in their life, and I think people remember certain dreams that they had that maybe they didn't like what was going on in the dream, and you just decide in your dream that I'm going to switch this, and so, you know, I remember at a young age being able to do that. I think that's not necessarily uncommon. So that you're having a lucid dream right there when you're cognitive of what's happening in the dream, even though you're completely asleep, and you change the course of the dream. So people have that ability, and I'm not sure exactly when or who initiated it with athletes. I'm probably sure that it was probably done in the former Soviet Union, that maybe athletes were taught this. And I guess I'm going to defer to Peter on that.
I think what we have now is we have more and more science, and maybe even some quantifiable scientific results, experimental results that help to understand how the mind works. 30, 40 years ago, when these were used, it was more experimental use, and even the one that we discuss in the book, the use of skiers, alpine skiers that successfully used it. It was more of a description of their experience rather than a pre-planned and special experiment. It was an experiment of their experimental. It was like a description of their experimental practice, saying, yeah, they would be programming themselves to go through their skiing course as they sleep, and master or refine their movements on the course that they remembered, and we've done a lot of things that coaches and some teachers kind of felt, and from experience they know that we try to do as much as possible of cognitive kind of programming before sleep for sports that require like take for example horseback riding. You come to a competition and you need to ride a very quite complex route of 15 obstacles with different jumps through the water, with different types, different configurations, and it's a very complicated line of obstacles. So what we would do, we would go there at night and run as you ride a horse, run through that course, around that course. Try to ideally get it the night before, so you sleep on it. A lot of teachers know and recommend their students to read certain material before they go to bed. Assuming that you memorize it better, and what you read is going to be repeated in your mind. That's how you might be able to remember it better. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of examples of good coaches and teachers trying to use the dream and sleep to enhance the mind work. And what we've done is that we understand how mind works better. We understand we have scientific evidence of what we assumed 30 years ago. So this lucid dreaming is becoming more of a mechanical process rather than organic, intuitive process. Now it is more rational and more, I'd say, more mechanical, you can call it, because you understand the mechanics of your mind now rather than you feel how it should work. And also the technology, these biofeedback, the technology that allows you to understand how the mind works is also helping. We can also monitor the mind as we sleep and enhance our lucid dreaming by monitoring each athlete's personal condition, assuming that they're more or less successful based on some assignments we give them. But I think, again, we can all still experiment, and every coach can take this practice and try to experiment with it and try to help every athlete to sleep better, first of all, healthier, deeper, but then also try to program before sleep on certain tasks.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot more accessible nowadays with, the internet, and there are apps right now where you can have binaural beats on your phone, or run just simple YouTube where you're listening to music that is set up to help the brain get into a rhythm, to help you to get into a lucid dream state. And like Peter said, a great practice for an athlete is to get that exposure. Like he said, they'd take the athletes to go ride the course in advance, and then so they sleep on it and understand that it'd be best, if they could dream and maybe control the dream. That's all the lucid dreaming is. But the binaural beats, the apps, the YouTube, the internet, an athlete, it's much more accessible and easier nowadays than it was 30 years ago. You can simply get into the practice by exposing your mind to it. You could watch video of great athletes doing what you want to do, so you get exposure before you go to sleep. You could use the binaural beats, simple YouTube video. They go for 4 hours, 5 hours. You go to sleep. You've already seen and exposed your mind to what it is before you went to sleep, and now you're using lucid dreaming technique. It's that simple. So it's a lot more accessible. It's again, people will still think it's fringe for probably a long time, but it's much more accessible.
I was just going to mention, as you guys were talking, I came back to my mind reading a book called Super Learning, which was like around 2000, and they were talking about ways of enhancing learning, for students, and the use of Baroque music. I think it was 60 beats or 40 beats, I can't remember now, in combination with either affirmations or whatever spoken by someone else, or by where you record it for yourself. And they found, I think it's in the theta state, and I could have some of my science back, which is, you guys will have to forgive me on this, but that you're highly suggestible right before you fall asleep, before you get into REM sleep. You're very suggestible, and that the use of some of the self-talk or recorded affirmations have more of an effect, and can also affect your dream states as well. And that kind of, I was thinking of that while you guys were talking, that there's a lot to be had there because it's an area that we probably really still don't understand really well. Like there's a lot to be learned and a lot of value probably still to be had from that. The more that we kind of learn about it. But the idea of the lucid dreaming, though, is definitely something that is not so far-fetched that the athlete can't take it and start experimenting. Look around, like you said, you might want, specific music, maybe accompanying it with certain affirmations. A lot of people suggest that you put them together, the music and the affirmation together sometimes. Or you're telling it to yourself, verbally, before you go to sleep or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be had there. And like we talked about earlier, the mind doesn't know the difference between something that really happened and a very vivid dream. It kind of takes it on as it happened, or it's reality for you. And that can have a huge impact on the athlete's performance, obviously.
Mhm. Yeah. I think, gentlemen, it's been about 45-minute session already, and
All right. Well, we're getting
we covered
smaller
two
now. We're doing good.
I think we did. I think we did all right. This is.
We did. Yeah.
But we have some other areas in the sports psychology that we would like to get into, but I think opening up one right now will take us a little too long. But I think we covered lucid dreaming and autogenic training pretty well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you, as always, taking the time to go through each one of these subjects in detail, so that the reader and also the listener can kind of get a more in-depth perspective. Those who have read the book, and then those who are reading the book or haven't read it yet, are all getting this detailed information that's not necessarily only in the book. I really appreciate that, because it's giving a truly a 360 view of the book, and so I really appreciate you guys' help with that. So we're going to get back together again next week, and I think we're going to talk breathing, if I remember right, or something else in the psychology area. Might end up being something else. Who knows which way we'll go with that? But anyway, I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you so much, as always. I look forward to speaking to you guys next week.
Yep. Have a nice evening, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank
Yep,
you.
bye.